Reading with your kids.
Hola, ni hao, konnichiwa, assalamu alaikum, shalom, jumbo, bienvenidos. Hi, my name is Jedley, and this is the Reading with Your Kids podcast. We are coming to you from the beautiful neighborhood of Reedville in the southwest corner of Boston, Massachusetts. We are so delighted that you're part of our beautiful Reading with Your Kids family. Please be sure to subscribe to the podcast on the iHeartRadio app, on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, Spotify, wherever you find your podcast. Our guest today is Victoria Bond. She is here to celebrate Zora and Me, the Summoner. Before we invite Victoria into the studio, I want to thank you for being part of our Reading with Your Kids family. So many of you reach out and they ask us how can they support the podcast. And of course, the best way to do it is to subscribe to the show on wherever you find your podcast. Let your friends know about it. Share links to your favorite episodes. Also be connecting with us on social media, facebook.com/readingwithyourkids, at Jedley Magic on Twitter, at Reading With Your Kids on Instagram. There's another way that you can help support us, and that's by visiting our website, readingwithyourkids.com. We have a great merchandise page on the website. We have Reading With Your Kids t-shirts, a beautiful Reading With Your Kids mug, and, of course, our oh-so-stylish Reading With Your Kids face mask to keep you and your neighbors and your families safe during COVID. We also have a bookstore. It's right there at the top of the page. Go to readingwithyourkids.com. Button for our merch page and our bookstore is right there at the top of the page. We really appreciate you supporting the show. Thank you so very, very much. Joining us right now from the beautiful Garden State of New Jersey. Absolutely one of my favorite places. Our guest today is here to celebrate the release of Book 3 in her Zora and Me Trilogy. The latest book is called Zora and Me, the Summoner. Please welcome to the show, Victoria Bond. Victoria, how are you?
I'm fine. Thank you so much. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. As I was saying to you right before we started recording, I think this is an important topic to talk about. Zora and Me takes place in the Jim Crow South. Am I right?
Yes.
So before we talk about the specifics of the book, if you would, just kind of, because I am old and I didn't live in the South. I grew up in Boston, so we didn't have Jim Crow laws. We certainly had discrimination. And people experienced prejudice and whatnot, but not to the extent that folks in the South did. And I have my best buddy grew up in Atlanta during that time, and he experienced it and shared some of that experience with me. But why don't you just kind of go over and just remind us all about what was going on in that time in history?
Okay, so I'll start by saying that the Zora and Me Trilogy is a middle grade mystery series inspired by the life of the anthropologist and the novelist Zora Neale Hurston. And Zora Neale Hurston is a really unique figure in part because she grows up in the Jim Crow South at the turn of the 20th century, but she grows up in a place called Eatonville, Florida, which was one of the first all-black incorporated towns in the United States. And this past summer, around the protests and the demands for racial and social justice that hit the streets, there was some talk of other black communities in the early 20th century. Unfortunately, many of these communities suffered great violence, were destroyed and met with riots and so forth. So the Jim Crow South, right? Jim Crow was a set of laws that established that black people would be permanent second-class citizens, barring the right to vote, barring the right to attend adequate, often schools, barring the right to have, decent jobs with decent wages under reasonable and safe conditions. So places like Eatonville started to spring up all across the South and in some places in the Midwest as these Black settlement communities that gave Black people an opportunity to run and own businesses and also to live under, safe and secure circumstances, as safe and secure as they could be at this time, right? So these communities were an effort for Black people, by Black people, to establish themselves. At the same time, these communities were also targets for racial violence and hostility. So the Zora and Me series, in each of our books, we kind of use a monster kind of mystery trope to explore these very real horror issues for Black people and Black communities at this time.
I just have such a hard time wrapping my head around this idea that a human being is a second-class citizen. I just don't get. I don't know how you can justify in your mind that, okay, these folks, you're over here and we're not going to have anything to do to you and we're going to make life difficult. And I said, I just have a hard time wrapping my head around it.
And I think we all do. I think that's why the real Zora Neale Hurston is such a compelling figure to explore her childhood, because she was someone as an adult who didn't let her race, didn't let her gender, didn't let her background serve as an obstacle or stop her from pursuing any of the work she found essential and important to do. And as an author, right, especially an author for kids, you want to expose kids to figures that really don't see boundaries, don't see barriers, don't see obstacles, don't see who they are as anything that can stop them. In fact, Zora saw and used who she was, being from Eatonville, Florida, as a way to do her work, as a tool with which to navigate the world. And I think that's what these books try to show kids, that there's a lot of tough stuff out here in the world that we're all experiencing all of the time. And these books try to offer some tools, some coping mechanisms. These books are a big purporter of curiosity as being a modality that you can use both to understand your world and make it a little bit better. One friendship at a time, one interesting conversation at a time.
I love that. I love that idea that Zora didn't see obstacles. Some people out there might think, well, that's not realistic. You gotta deal with the world as it is. But yeah, if you look at the world and say, nope, I'm not going to let anything stop me. That's a really empowering mindset to have.
Yes, it really is. And in our books, we try to show where that Zora came from, right? How that Zora was groomed and grown up by this community in terms of, solving and kind of navigating these mysteries. And again, for the real Zora Neale Hurston, right? She's born in 1891. She grows up and ends up being the first Black graduate from Barnard College, right? She ends up being a figure of the Harlem Renaissance. She ends up writing more anthropological books, actually, than novels, though she has become famous for being a novelist. And, the thing about Zora that I think it's important for especially young people to grapple with a little bit is that she had some success and she was a prominent figure in her time. And she also saw that success and that prominence disintegrate. And she didn't stop writing. Right? She didn't stop working. She didn't stop being an interesting human being. It was just that people weren't looking at her anymore. People weren't interested anymore. But that didn't stop her from being interesting, right? And I think this is especially an important message for all of us, and especially young people, when we live so much of our lives online, with social media and our posts and our updates, I think sometimes it's hard to forget that you can still live your life and be you and have experiences without anyone watching, without anyone seeing them.
Wait a minute. I can survive. I can be happy if I don't get 1,000 likes on everything I post online?
I don't know if we can. I don't know if we can anymore. But, the life of Zora Neale Hurston and a lot of other artists, for that matter, is really kind of an example in what you do and how you live when people aren't so into you anymore, right? And I think the other example of her life is that the reason why people weren't so interested in her anymore, because she was a woman, because she wrote about women, because she wrote about Black people in a way that didn't emphasize racism every minute of the day, right? This was kind of not mainstream at the time, right? Her Black male critics really criticized her for writing about a woman, for writing about the South, for not emphasizing at all times the way that racism circumscribed Black people's lives. And her position was, yes, racism is real. I've experienced it, but Black people are people too. And we have experiences and we're living our lives and we're doing things, we're having relationships, and I'm interested in writing about that. And that was outside of the mainstream then. But this is in part why Zora is so popular now. This is, kind of the basis for Alice Walker's resurrection of Zora as a kind of a feminist icon that was interested in human beings as human beings. So
I love that. Being interested in human beings as human beings. We tend to put so many labels on ourselves that sometimes I think our humanity gets hidden by those labels. Yeah, I would love to know a little bit more about this story, the Summoner. What's going to be going on in this book?
Well, this book was a tough one to write in part because I always knew the ending, right? Because it's the final book in a trilogy. I always knew that the end of this book, Zora Neale Hurston would leave Eatonville, right? And the thing that was interesting and hard and difficult to figure out is why exactly does she leave Eatonville, right? What are the circumstances that get set up that propel her to reach for and attain her destiny? And in The Summoner, the book opens with a fugitive on the run. And there is a mob that's after this fugitive who is believed to be hiding out in Eatonville. And this, of course, is an event that puts the whole town on edge because they are this Black community. They believe themselves to be mostly safe from white hostility and violence, and suddenly they're not. Right? Because this interloper is searching for a safe haven and has kind of interrupted their happy existence. So from that point, the whole town is kind of, again, they're on edge, they're nervous, and this creates the circumstances that really shake up the town when after this lynching occurs, when the fugitive is caught, then there's a grave robbery. So now there's a grave robbery, right? So now we have hoodoo in the mix, voodoo in the mix. Was this a grave robbery? Or was this old crazy man around the town, has he become a zombie?
No.
So as I said, each of these books uses a kind of a trope of the horror mystery genre. So in the first volume, it's a gator monster. And the second volume, in The Cursed Ground, it's a ghost. And then this third book, it's a zombie. So there's a lynching, the town has been violated, then there's this other kind of sacrilegious event with this grave robbery, and the town is kind of just all up in arms. And what does the town do? How do they respond, right? There's an election. And Zora's father is running for mayor. And Zora's father is a really brilliant, successful preacher, but he's also a showboater. He's also a womanizer. He's also incredibly selfish. And he sees all of the upheaval in the town as his opportunity to kind of come in and seize power.
Mm.
That's what the Summoner is about.
You got a lot going on there.
Too much. It was too much. But, writing for a middle grade audience, when you have a lot going on, middle school, middle grade, the audience, the readers have a lot going on. Mm-hmm. And then the fun thing about writing for this audience is that the chapters are short, right? So it helps when you have a lot of plot points if you're just really shrinking them down chapter by chapter in these little bite-sized bits. It helps it make it digestible for the writer as well as for the reader.
Yeah. I forget about middle grade audiences. I love that. I can't tell you. I mean, and I know I did it when I was in those middle grades. I do it now. If I'm picking up a book or listening to an audiobook, I'll look, and if I see this chapter is going to take an hour and a half to read, for the narrator to read the audiobook, I'm like, I don't know if I can handle it. I like the doom. I like to keep things moving.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah.
Me
too. What was it that inspired you to first start writing for this audience?
Oh, it was very practical. I wrote a novel. Oh my gosh, the first time I tried to sit down and write a novel, I guess it was about 15 years ago now, 15, 16 years ago. And it was really bad. It was horrible. It was just a shipwreck. It was just the worst. But the only part of the novel that worked were the young characters. I had a group of kids in the book. And those were the only sections of the novel that really cohered, had voice and personality. So after that experience, taking a thoughtful look at it, I thought, maybe I should start writing books where kids are the main characters. Maybe I can get a book to work if it's really just all about the kids.
It's important to understand your strengths.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I remember, I'm not going to go into detail, but I remember the first time I tried to perform magic, it was abysmal. It was a total failure. And unfortunately, it was in front of 10,000 people. But we survived. We survived. The trick actually worked. Everything leading up to it didn't, but we survived and we learned from it and moved on. And so both of us learned from our early mistakes and were able to be successful.
Yeah, you have to. There's no other way to keep going if you don't learn from your mistakes. It's hard to keep going.
I'm wondering, did you get any pushback from taking a historical figure and creating a fictionalized young early start to her life?
No, actually, I think it's been quite the opposite. The Zora and Me Trilogy is the first books to be endorsed by the Zora Neale Hurston estate that were not written by Zora herself. So that's been a real professional honor for them to have given this series the stamp of approval. I think another fun part of writing books that are about a historical figure, but about a historical figure at a time in their life when not much is known, is that it really has given us free rein to kind of explore and build upon very small details in the real Zora Neale Hurston's life and work. So that's been really fun, kind of just blowing up very small things in her autobiography, a very small detail here, very small detail there, and kind of giving these details, these kind of elaborate backstories. So that's been, really fun for me as someone who's interested in historical fiction and in history generally.
Yeah. Now, as somebody who is obviously a great admirer of Zora Neale Hurston, is it kind of hard to, come to the end of the trilogy?
Oh no, It's not hard. I can't believe it's actually done.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I'm kind of more in disbelief. I think for anyone that has spent, a lot of time, a lot of years on and off working on something, you just kind of can't quite believe it's over, and for me, it's this kind of the physical kind of body memory of being on a writing schedule, because I have a day job and I have a small child. I would wake up around like 3:45, 4 in the morning to kind of work on the manuscript for a few hours before I would get dressed and go to work and get my kid together. So occasionally I will wake up, about 4 a.m. and be like, oh my God, I have to get out of bed. I have to it's like, oh God, thank God it's over. I don't have to do it. Oh, I can, roll over. So I still have, that's kind of embedded in me now after years of doing that.
So obviously you have your hands filled with your child and work and the pandemic. Do you have another figure in mind, or is there somebody else out there that you want to introduce the world to?
That's a good question. I am working on more historical fiction, another mystery, and it is related to a historical figure. But this time the historical figure is not the protagonist. So kind of working in a kind of similar framework, but in a different context. I'm from New Jersey. I'm here in New Jersey. I'm from New Jersey. And I spent a lot of time writing about Florida. And I'm finally now writing about my own home state.
Yeah.
So now I'm writing a story about New Jersey, set in New Jersey with important New Jersey historical figures. So.
Wow, that's New Jersey is a fascinating place with a fascinating present, and I'm sure a very fascinating past.
Yeah, it's a lot of funny history. The Weird New Jersey magazine that's been around forever. Like it's really every stone you turn, there's something a little bit off, a little bit something connected to some huge thing that you knew about but didn't know had a connection to New Jersey. Yeah. So it's been fun writing about home.
That's awesome. I said at the beginning of the show, New Jersey is one of my favorite places in the world. I don't know why it gets this bad rap. I don't know if it's because it's, basically a suburb of New York and Philadelphia, but man, the people in New Jersey are really great, and there are some really, really pretty spots the north of Jersey. When you get outside of the city, it's gorgeous, and the Pine Barrens and the shorelines, and if you haven't been to New Jersey, or if the only thing that you've done in New Jersey is drive down the turnpike, do yourself a favor and explore a little bit more.
Well, Jed, I love Massachusetts. Berkshires is one of my favorite places in the world. So I love your state. It's just beautiful. The people, all the things to do, all the history in your state is just, I can't talk enough about it. I will give you just a little bit of kind of author trivia. In the piece that I'm working on now, I have been kind of thinking about Herman Melville's house, Arrowhead. Mm-hmm. Berkshires has been kind of a place in my mind that I'm kind of using, to kind of organize my thoughts as the characters move around the house. I realized the other day, it's Herman Melville's house. And that I have these people living in. So.
Very cool. Very cool. Hey, I know folks are going to want to know where they can go online to find out more about Victoria Bond and all of your work.
So my website is victoriabondauthor.com. You can also check me out on Instagram. My Instagram tag name is Way to Go Vicky, Vicky, Bond, B-O-N-D. So I'm at victoriabondauthor.com and Way to Go Vicky Bond on Instagram.
Well, we want to say way to go, Vicky, for bringing us Zora and the Summoner. I am really excited about it. We've had a great time speaking to Victoria Bond. Victoria, thanks so much for being with us.
thank you. Really, it was a pleasure meeting you and chatting with you. Thank you so much.
Please be sure to join us for the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. Two great guests, husband and wife. Deirdre Breckenridge Scribola and her husband Mark Scribola are here to celebrate A Whisper from Noel. That is the next episode of the Reading with Your Kids podcast. And please don't forget that we are going to be reading in the new year. That's right, we are going to have a free virtual online literacy event happening at the end of the year to celebrate the end, saying goodbye to year 2020, saying hello to the full of promise and hope and good times year of 2021. It's all happening online. Just be sure to mark your calendar. We'll have more information to you in the coming days. I can't wait to be reading in the new year with you and your kids. I want to thank the folks who made today's show so wonderful. Of course, I want to thank our guest, Victoria Bond. Be sure to check out her Zora and Me Trilogy. Also want to thank my team, Alejandra Doherty, Fatima Khan. I want to thank my beautiful wife for all the support she gives me, but most of all, we all want to thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to join us today, and as always, thank you so very much for taking the time to make the world a better place by reading with your kids. I'll be looking for you in the next edition of the Reading with Your Kids podcast.